The morning sky over the Pacific was painted with streaks of gold and pink, the kind of sunrise that usually whispered calm to those who watched it. But on this day, in 1944, calm was nowhere to be found. Far above the endless waves, Japanese officers scanned the horizon with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Something unusual was approaching a lone fighter, unmistakable in its silhouette, yet strangely different from any they had encountered before. It was a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, one of the most feared aircraft in the American arsenal. But this one carried an anomaly: extra tanks, strapped beneath its wings like hidden lifelines. For the Japanese pilots watching from below, it seemed almost impossible. How could a single plane, already sleek and deadly, carry such heavy additional fuel and still maintain its deadly speed and maneuverability? Their curiosity turned to tactical calculation. They knew that long-range P-38’s had been spotted before, but this one was different. This was not a routine reconnaissance. This was a fighter on a mission with endurance no one had anticipated. And yet, despite the extra tanks, there was something they noticed that made their hearts lift with a cautious hope. The plane began to lag, falling behind the formation of American aircraft it had been escorting. It wasn't just chance. The Japanese officers, some veterans of countless dogfights, had trained their eyes to spot the smallest hints of weakness, and this P-38 seemed to show it. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed from their vantage point hundreds of feet below, was that this apparent disadvantage would soon reveal a deadly, hidden truth. The story of that day is not just about machines in the sky. It's about the men inside them, the split-second decisions that meant life or death, and the invisible factors that could change the outcome of a battle in the blink of an eye. The Pacific theater was full of legends: pilots who dared impossible feats, mechanics who pushed machines to their limits, and strategies that seemed to defy logic. This encounter, seemingly minor at first glance, would come to be remembered for its astonishing revelation, a moment where technology and human ingenuity collided in a way that left both sides stunned. To understand why that single P-38 was flying with extra tanks, we need to go back to the moment America realized it needed something more. Long-range missions were becoming the backbone of the Allied strategy in the Pacific. Islands were scattered across thousands of miles of open ocean, and holding the air meant everything. Aircraft had to travel farther, fight harder, and return safely, often without support from land bases. The P-38, with its twin engines and distinctive twin-boom design, became the workhorse of this strategy. Its speed and firepower were unmatched at high altitude, and its long-range capability made it perfect for escorting bombers across hostile skies. But every advantage came with a cost. Extra fuel meant extra weight, and extra weight affected every aspect of a plane's performance. Acceleration, climbing ability, maneuverability, all were subtly but significantly reduced. Yet, the P-38 was designed with adaptability in mind. Pilots learned to compensate, adjusting throttle, angle, and tactics to keep the aircraft nimble even when burdened. This wasn't just engineering brilliance, it was a psychological battle too. Pilots knew that being prepared for disadvantage often became the key to survival in combat. On the other side, Japanese officers were no strangers to these challenges. Their Zero fighters were agile, famously able to outturn almost any Allied aircraft at low speeds. They relied on superior maneuverability and tactical cunning, often working in pairs or formations to exploit weaknesses. But long-range encounters with heavily loaded P-38's posed a unique challenge. These planes could fly far, strike hard, and disappear before Japanese pilots had time to react. And when one started to fall behind, it triggered a dangerous mix of curiosity and opportunity. This P-38, though, was no ordinary escort mission. The pilots had been briefed for a strike deep behind enemy lines, and the extra tanks were a lifeline for a journey that would test both machine and man. For those watching from afar, the sight of the plane slowing seemed like a moment of victory, a chance to attack what appeared to be a weakened target. But appearances can be deceiving. In the world of aerial warfare, small details matter more than anyone imagines. A glance at the plane's angle of climb, a subtle shift in its speed, or the faint smell of exhaust could reveal more about its capabilities than any officer could read on a tactical map. And so, the stage was set. High above the shimmering Pacific, an encounter was unfolding that would hinge on observation, experience, and the fine balance between risk and reward. The Japanese officers, trained to exploit hesitation, watched as the P-38 began to lag. Their minds raced with tactical possibilities. Could this be the moment to strike? Or was it a trap, a deception born from the ingenuity of the American engineers and the bravery of the pilot? Little did they know, the plane's apparent weakness was part of a carefully calculated plan, one that would reveal a side of air combat most never saw. And soon, the reason the P-38 was falling behind would transform from a moment of curiosity into a revelation so astonishing it would leave both sides re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about the machines they trusted with their lives. This was more than a story about a plane with extra tanks. It was about anticipation and cunning, the invisible forces that shape warfare, and the moments that define history. In a few minutes, the Japanese officers would understand, in the most dramatic way possible, why the P-38's temporary lag was not a vulnerability, but the first sign of a hidden advantage that would change the course of that encounter forever. The Japanese officers squinted through their binoculars, trying to make sense of what they saw. The P-38's extra tanks were clearly weighing it down, but there was more than meets the eye. They noted its erratic movement, a subtle drop in speed, a slight wobble in the wings. To them, it seemed an opportunity. Perhaps they could close in and force a kill. The officers exchanged quiet murmurs over their radios, analyzing every detail, calculating angles of attack, and debating who would take the first shot. Yet, even as their excitement grew, there was a creeping sense of uncertainty. Something about this plane didn't add up. The pilot inside the P-38 was acutely aware of every ounce of weight he carried. He could feel it in the stick, in the engine's strain, and in the way the aircraft responded, or rather, resisted his commands. But this wasn't a problem he couldn't manage. This was precisely why the extra tanks were there, to extend his reach beyond what any Japanese pilot expected. The plane had been modified for a mission that would take it deeper into enemy territory than usual. Every gallon of fuel was a gamble, every pound a calculated risk, yet the pilot trusted his aircraft implicitly. He had flown this setup countless times in training, and he knew its limits intimately. For the Japanese, the situation seemed almost surreal. They had studied American tactics, known the plane's performance specs, and trained for months to anticipate this kind of encounter. But nothing in their experience could prepare them for what happened next. The P-38, despite appearing slower and burdened, maintained an astonishingly steady course. It fell behind just enough to draw attention, but not enough to compromise its mission. Observers could see the subtle art of deception at work. The plane seemed vulnerable, almost careless, yet every motion was precise, deliberate, and calculated. The officers watched, eyes narrowing, as the fighter's speed dipped and then surged in unexpected bursts. How could it accelerate so suddenly, after appearing so weighted down moments before? The explanation was hidden in plain sight. The extra fuel tanks, though heavy, were carefully positioned for balance. The pilot had mastered the plane's center of gravity, allowing him to maintain control even when others would falter. The plane's twin engines roared in perfect synchronization, pushing the fighter forward with a quiet ferocity that only an experienced pilot could exploit. It was a subtle trick of physics and human skill, combined a lesson in how perception can mislead even the most seasoned observers. As the chase continued, Japanese officers realized they were witnessing a masterclass in aerial strategy. The P-38 wasn't simply carrying extra tanks, it was using them to manipulate expectations. By appearing slower, it baited the enemy into overconfidence. A less experienced pilot might have rushed in to attack, only to find themselves outmaneuvered by a fighter that seemed vulnerable but was anything but. It was a psychological game, as much as a technical one, played at 300 miles per hour. Meanwhile, the pilot was calculating his next move. He had to maintain enough fuel to complete the mission, navigate through hostile skies, and survive the inevitable encounter with enemy fighters. Every decision mattered: how much throttle to use, when to climb or dive, and how to position the aircraft for both defense and escape. Each moment required a combination of split-second intuition and disciplined planning. He was not just flying a machine, he was orchestrating a performance designed to outwit an equally skilled opponent. From the Japanese perspective, Frustration began to creep in. Their instinct to strike was strong, but hesitation was prudent. One wrong move, one miscalculation in the chaos of the sky, and they could find themselves in trouble. The P-38's erratic behavior was deceptive. What seemed like weakness was actually strength disguised, a way of controlling the battle without firing a single shot. The officers could sense it, even if they couldn't articulate it fully. The American pilot was always one step ahead. History would later highlight the significance of these encounters, but at that moment, in the thick of battle, the lessons were immediate and visceral. Observing a P-38 carrying extra tanks, Japanese officers were forced to confront the reality that appearances in the sky could be misleading. Aircraft that seemed burdened could suddenly demonstrate deadly agility, and pilots who looked overextended could strike with precision. Every maneuver had consequences, and every choice could mean the difference between survival and disaster. And then there were the technical details that few on either side fully appreciated at the time. The P-38's engines were designed to tolerate sustained high power, giving it bursts of speed even while loaded. Its aerodynamics, particularly the twin-boom design, provided stability under uneven weight distribution. The extra fuel allowed it to fly longer missions without refueling, a strategic advantage that Japanese pilots could not ignore. Even the simple act of managing throttle and trim became a finely tuned art, transforming what seemed like a disadvantage into an operational advantage. The officers exchanged quick glances. Something had shifted. The P-38's temporary lag was no longer just a curiosity, it was a lesson in patience, planning, and deception. Every twist in its flight path, every fluctuation in speed, was carefully designed to test the enemy's assumptions. They realized that this plane was not merely trying to survive, it was leading them into a calculated scenario where only a mistake on their part would allow them to engage effectively. And yet, despite their understanding, the tension in the air was palpable. Time seemed to stretch as the P-38 continued its flight, slowly, deliberately, with the extra tanks still strapped beneath its wings. The Japanese officers could anticipate every move, but could they predict the unseen mastery of both pilot skill and engineering that allowed this fighter to maintain its lethal potential? The answer was no, and that uncertainty made the encounter all the more dangerous and riveting. This was more than a skirmish in the Pacific. It was a battle of wits, technology, and nerves. The Japanese officers were learning a truth that many pilots would come to understand only through bitter experience. Appearances in aerial combat were rarely what they seemed. A plane that seemed weak could be deadly, a delay could be deliberate, and every detail of flight mattered more than anyone realized. And so, the P-38 continued, its engines humming with quiet menace, carrying its hidden advantage in full view, drawing the enemy's attention while keeping the pilot firmly in control. What happened next would reveal why the plane's lag was not a flaw at all, but the first indication of a calculated strategy that would astonish those watching and demonstrate the brutal ingenuity that defined the skies over the Pacific. The P-38 continued its flight, seemingly burdened by its extra tanks, yet every movement was precise, deliberate, and calculated. The Japanese officers below leaned closer to their instruments, watching the plane's subtle shifts in speed and altitude. Their curiosity had transformed into cautious tension. Something about this aircraft defied logic. They could see it slowing at moments, appearing vulnerable, yet it never faltered under pressure. It was a paradox. A fighter that seemed to struggle was in fact executing a plan that only the pilot could fully understand. Then, in a split second that would be remembered by those who witnessed it, the reason became horrifyingly clear. The P-38's temporary lag was not a weakness, it was a signal of the aircraft's hidden strength. The extra tanks, heavy as they were, had altered its center of gravity in a way that allowed the pilot to conserve energy for a critical maneuver. What appeared to be falling behind was actually the prelude to a sudden, calculated acceleration. When the pilot triggered full power, the P-38 surged forward with a speed and precision that left observers stunned. The Japanese officers could only watch, momentarily frozen, as the fighter reclaimed its lead, slipping past formations and vanishing like a phantom. It was a lesson in patience, preparation, and mastery. The pilot had understood the aircraft intimately, the weight of every drop of fuel, the strain of the engines, the balance of the plane in the sky. By allowing it to appear disadvantaged, he baited enemy observers into a false sense of security, giving himself the psychological and tactical edge. The P-38 had become more than a machine. It was an extension of human foresight, a weapon that combined engineering brilliance with instinctive skill. In those tense moments, the Japanese officers realized that the very thing they assumed was a flaw, the plane's slow lag, was actually its greatest advantage. They had been deceived not by trickery, but by mastery. A fighter whose pilot understood both physics and perception, who could manipulate what the enemy saw while keeping the true power hidden. This revelation was both humbling and terrifying. Even the most experienced aviators could be caught off guard when every detail, no matter how small, was used strategically. The encounter ended not with gunfire or a dogfight, but with understanding. The P-38's performance had demonstrated a crucial truth of aerial combat. Appearances can deceive, and a plane's real capability is only revealed through both observation and experience. The Japanese officers noted the aircraft's departure, the faint trail of condensation from its wings, and the calm, steady hum of its engines as it disappeared over the horizon. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a testament to human ingenuity under extreme conditions. For the pilot, the mission continued. The extra tanks ensured he could reach his objective, strike with precision, and return safely. The brief moment of apparent weakness had served its purpose. It was not vulnerability but strategy, and the lesson extended beyond this single encounter. In the skies of the Pacific, where every second mattered, and every decision could be the difference between life and death, understanding your aircraft and using it to its full potential was as important as marksmanship or courage. This story, passed down through reports and memoirs, became emblematic of a larger truth. In war, the battle is never just physical. It is mental, emotional, and deeply strategic. Every pilot, every engineer, and every officer had to grapple with the unknown, make rapid decisions, and trust their instincts in ways that often defied conventional wisdom. The P-38 with extra tanks was not simply an aircraft. It was a symbol of this reality, a moment where preparation, skill, and human ingenuity converged to create something that seemed impossible to those who observed it from afar. For the Japanese officers who had seen it, the encounter lingered long after the plane disappeared. They would tell stories of the P-38 that seemed to falter but always prevailed, a machine that taught them humility and the danger of assumptions. And for the pilot, there was no recognition beyond completing the mission, returning to base, and preparing for the next flight. Yet the impact of that brief encounter resonated, influencing tactics, training, and the way both sides approached aerial engagements in the vast expanse of the Pacific. In the end, the lesson is clear. What appears weak may be strong, and what seems slow may be swift. Mastery, strategy, and understanding can turn apparent disadvantages into decisive victories. The P-38 Lightning, burdened with extra tanks, falling behind in the eyes of its enemy, demonstrated that true power often lies hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And in that revelation, the skies of the Pacific whispered a story of human ingenuity, courage, and the razor's edge of aerial warfare, a story that continues to captivate and inspire, reminding us that in both war and life, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. The sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the ocean, and the legend of that P-38 flight endured. A plane that seemed vulnerable had proven the opposite, and in doing so, left an indelible mark on history. The Japanese officers would carry the memory of what they had witnessed, a brief, fleeting glimpse of precision, patience, and power at its finest. It was a reminder that in the vast theater of war, perception can be as deadly as any weapon, and the unseen mastery of a single individual can change the course of a battle without a shot being fired. And as the waves rolled silently below, and the winds of the Pacific swept across the sky, one truth remained unmistakable. The skies belonged not just to the strongest, but to those who understood them.